You are currently inhabiting a state of generational fragility, and it is the primary reason your strategic capital is undergoing a process of terminal evaporation. Even as you celebrate your success, you believe that wealth is an individual achievement, a personal reward for your singular persistence hunt in the economic landscape. This is a terminal civilizational hallucination. In the raw, unyielding arena of the persistence hunt, an organism that captures a massive resource but fails to fix it into the substrate of its pride is not a winner. It is a systemic failure. You are currently making money while the matrix is preparing to recycle your entire metabolic effort the moment your biological clock stops ticking. We are now presecting the biology of the relay, showing you why the concept of leaving an inheritance is a slave protocol designed for scavengers, and how the apex predator utilizes intergenerational accounting to move from the frequency of the dying winner to the frequency of the immortal founder. The human nervous system is capable of a rare evolutionary trait, temporal expansion. Most organisms are trapped in the now circuit, reacting to immediate hunger, seeking short-term social validation, and avoiding instant pain. This is the frequency of the prey. The apex predator, however, possesses the hormonal stillness to inhabit the century circuit. He does not view his life as a self-contained story. He views it as a single stroke in a larger, multi-generational movement of force. He understands that his identity is not his physical body, which is a temporary biological substrate, but the law of his house. The Matrix desperately wants you to focus on your retirement, a concept that is an admission of total biological defeat. Retirement implies you are waiting for your expiration date to finally stop producing and be free in a state of decay. The founder seeks immediate sovereignty for a bloodline that is engineered to outlast the current technological and social reset. Consider the pathology of the inheritance trap. The hierarchy has professionalized the wealth transfer process to ensure that any force captured by a sovereign individual eventually flows back into the hive's coffers. They have trained you to hoard liquid paper, a currency specifically designed to rot through the invisible tax of inflation. When you die, the estate tax audit and legal friction perform a biological liquidation of your bloodline. If your children are scavengers of the surplus who have not been trained to garrison the substrate, the hierarchy will inhale your captured energy within one generation. This is strategic sifting. The sovereign accountant of the dynasty does not leave money to be spent. He leaves a garrison to be guarded. He converts his kinetic life force into automated systems, physical land, and internal private laws that the state cannot easily audit or reset. He is not providing for his children. He is recruiting the future to defend the perimeter he has established. Recognition of this biological requirement is the only way out of the mud. You must stop thinking as a self-made man and start acting as a biological bridge. Your individual life is a high-voltage flash. Its only purpose is to ignite the persistent flame of the dynasty. If you fail to build the structure that holds that flame, you are just a brightly burning candle in a storm. You are currently spending your energy on yourself, while the sovereign is investing his energy into the structural inertia of his house. The audit of your life will not be based on your net worth at the moment of death, but on the velocity and direction of the capital you pass to the next runner in the relay. If the relay baton hits the ground, the entire hunt was for nothing. Stand up. Stop being the dead end of your lineage. Start the dynastic relay. You are currently inhabiting a state of lineage fragility, and it is the primary reason your accumulation is at risk of terminal evaporation through the hands of those you love most. You believe that providing your offspring with the best, the highest level of comfort, the most prestigious, effortless education, and a landscape devoid of struggle is the ultimate expression of your success. This is a terminal civilizational hallucination. In the raw, unyielding arena of the persistence hunt, comfort is the primary biological solvent of the hunter's instinct. By removing the friction from the lives of your heirs, you are effectively performing a neurological castration of your own bloodline. You are raising scavengers of the surplus rather than sentinels of the substrate. The sovereign man understands that the tragic cycle of weak men creating hard times is not a historical observation. It is a clinical law of metabolic atrophy. We are now presecting the biology of the sovereign heir, showing you why providing for your children is a strategic leap, and how the apex predator utilizes controlled adversity to move from the frequency of the doting parent to the frequency of the dynastic architect. The human nervous system is optimized for adaptation through resistance. The apex circuitry, the prefrontal cortex, the drive for territorial annexation, and the capacity for long-term strategic waiting only hardens when it is subjected to the harsh audit of the environment. When you provide an environment of zero resistance, you are denying your offspring the primary metabolic input input required for sovereignty. You are essentially pruning the neural pathways that identify threats and capture opportunities. The domesticated heir is trained to manage what you build. He is a consumer of inertia. He lacks the predatory clarity because he never had to identify a resource gap or defend a perimeter against a superior force. He possesses the tokens of wealth but lacks the biological competence to prevent them from being seized by the matrix. While you are building the fortress, you are accidentally raising the people who will leave the gate wide open for the scavengers. Consider the neurochemistry of the free calorie. When an organism receives a surplus of resources without a corresponding expenditure of effort, its dopamine reward system undergoes a systemic reset. The threshold for satisfaction rises to unattainable levels, while the capacity for persistence collapses. This is hormonal sabotage. Your children do not value your empire because their nervous systems have not paid for it in the currency of stress and sweat. To them, the substrate is a given, a background noise of their existence, rather than a hard-won victory that must be defended with their lives. The sovereign architect understands that ease is a pathology. He does not seek to protect his children from the world. He seeks to weaponize them for the world. He engineers synthetic friction, artificial landscapes of struggle where the heir must achieve autonomous annexation before he is ever allowed to touch the garrison's reserves. He understands that the only way to save the dynasty is to make the heir as hungry as the founder. The Matrix desperately wants your children to be soft kings. It wants them to be addicted to status signals, digital validation, and synthetic comfort. This ensures that when the dynastic relay reaches the second or third generation, the force of the lineage has been so diluted by comfort that the state can perform a tactical liquidation of your entire life's work. The sovereign accountant of the bloodline performs a clinical audit of utility. He asks, is this heir a force multiplier or a metabolic sink? If the heir is a leak, he is strategically sidelined. The sovereign predator prioritizes the integrity of the substrate over the individual's desire for comfort. He is not a provider in the domesticated sense. He is a general training his next line of commanders. He replaces the will with the bloodline law, a set of internal constraints that govern how the energy of the house is spent and who is allowed to wield it. Recognition of this biological requirement is the only way to prevent your empire from becoming a feast for the hive. You must move from the horizontal plane of the emotional parent to the vertical axis of the dynastic architect. You must stop giving and start gating. Every resource passed to the next generation must be earned through a demonstration of sovereignty. You are not building a safe haven. You are building a combat-ready continuity. If you do not provide the friction, the Matrix will provide the destruction. Your life's work is currently at the mercy of your offspring's weakness. Audit their capacity, engineering their resistance, secure the relay. You are currently inhabiting a state of legal transparency, and it is the primary reason your strategic capital is a sitting target for the scavengers of the Matrix. You believe that ownership is the highest form of security, that having your name on a title, a deed, or a bank account is the ultimate proof of your power. This is a terminal civilizational hallucination. In the raw, unyielding arena of the persistence hunt, visibility is the equivalent of a death sentence. To own something in your own name is to broadcast your metabolic coordinates to every predator in the environment, from the state's tax scavengers to the high-frequency litigators of the hive. You are currently collecting titles, while the sovereign predator is busy annexing the shadows. We are now bisecting the architecture of the sovereign perimeter, showing you why personal ownership is a slave protocol and how the apex architect utilizes structural sequestration to move from the frequency of the target to the frequency of the ghost in the system. The Matrix has designed the legal and financial infrastructure of the 21st century, specifically to facilitate the biological recycling of force. Every standard legal instrument, the simple will, the joint bank account, the individual property title, is a perforated membrane through which your energy leaks. When you die, or when you are targeted by a systemic strike, these membranes fail instantly. The probate audit is a state-sponsored scavenging event where the hierarchy performs a post-mortem extraction of your life's work. If your assets are tied to your legal identity, they are as fragile as your biological substrate. The sovereign architect understands that to protect the dynasty, he must perform a total decoupling. He must separate control from ownership. He creates a structural perimeter, a private legal universe that exists independently of his pulse. He does not own the assets. He commands the entity that owns them. He becomes penniless on paper, but omnipotent in reality. This is the first law of the garrison. Consider the pathology of the public record. The hierarchy wants a transparent citizenry because transparency is the precursor to liquidation. They want to know exactly where your energy vents are located so they can tap into them at will. Most of of you are socially branded, your wealth is integrated into your public persona. This is strategic sabotage. It creates a direct path for any scavenger to strike at your core. The sovereign accountant of the dynasty practices informational sequestration. He utilizes jurisdictional silence, moving his core assets into digital and physical enclaves that do not report to the central hive. He utilizes blind trusts, private foundations, and captive entities to create layers of structural fog. By the time a scavenger tries to trace the source of the flow, they find themselves lost in a labyrinth of legal wrappers and encrypted ledgers. He is not hiding wealth, he is garrisoning reality. He understands that in 2026, silence is a force multiplier. We must now analyze the biology of the Sentinel Protocol. The greatest threat to the dynastic relay is not the external enemy, but the internal leak, the heir who possesses the right of succession but lacks the competence of the hunt. If you leave a weak heir in direct control of a liquid asset, you are effectively feeding the dynasty to the wolves. The sovereign architect utilizes gated access architecture. He does not pass the keys to the treasury. He passes the governance of the protocol. He utilizes discretionary trust structures where a council of sentinels, a mix of automated AI auditors and trusted strategic allies, holds the veto power over the heir's spending. The heir is provided with metabolic support, but the core substrate remains untouched and untouchable. This prevents the second-generation entropy from liquidating the fortress to pay for status signals. The dynasty is protected from its own members through a private law of the house. The assets are not property. They are a sacred trust of the bloodline that no single individual has the right to destroy. The architecture of the sovereign perimeter requires a transition from linear wealth to spatial defense. You must view your capital as a territory that must be defended by automated defense systems. In the digital age, this means moving your ledger into decentralized, non-custodial environments where the state cannot freeze your pulse with a single keystroke. It means utilizing smart contracts to automate the distribution of yield based on performance milestones rather than chronological age. You are not writing a will, you are programming a continuity. For those ready to move from the metabolic waste of the transparent consumer to the high-voltage sovereignty of the architect, the Protocol 260 provides the clinical blueprints for constructing these automated digital empires. This is the tactical fulcrum. You utilize the machine to build a self-correcting garrison that continues to hunt, accumulate, and defend long after your biological substrate has returned to the earth. We must observe the neurochemistry of structural certainty. The man who owns everything in his name is a man plagued by chronic sympathetic arousal. He knows deep in his primal brain that he is one lawsuit or one regulatory shift away from total extinction. This anxiety forces him to play small, to seek approval from the hierarchy to ensure his survival. But the sovereign who has sequestrated his core operates from a state of hormonal stillness. He knows that even if his legal persona is attacked, his dynastic substrate remains intact in the shadows. This strategic gravity allows him to take asymmetric risks that the transparent man cannot fathom. He is unleasable. He is unstoppable. He has moved from the frequency of the tenant to the frequency of the lord. He does not ask for permission to exist. He enforces his existence through the complexity of his perimeter. The entropy of the individual rights narrative is the final cage. The giants want you to believe that individual ownership is your greatest right. No. In the persistence hunt, group continuity is the only right that matters. The sovereign accountant focuses on structural solvency. He understands that his primary moral obligation is to ensure that the energy of his ancestors and his own captured force are not squandered by the scavenger state or a malfunctioning heir. He reaches a point of jurisdictional sovereignty where his house is its own private state with its own currency, hard assets, its own defense, structural fog, and its own succession law. He is no longer a subject of the matrix. He is the architect of a dynasty. He has achieved temporal independence. He is the judge of his own perimeter, and his internal law is the only accounting standard that survives the coming reset. Recognition of this biological requirement is the only way out of the mud. You must move from the horizontal plane of the property owner to the vertical axis of the sovereign architect. You must stop signing deeds and start engineering enclaves. The hunt is not a legal game. It is a specific target acquisition of the structural autonomy that defines your existence. You must decide what you are. Are you the target whose wealth is being monitored and prepared for harvest, or the sovereign predator who has disappeared into the complexity of his own garrison? The primal code is not about tax planning. It is about territorial annexation of the legal void. Find the coordinate where the hive cannot see your core and put all your metabolic weight on it. Stand up, audit your visibility leaks, and begin the final construction of your sovereign kingdom. The abyss is waiting for the transparent, but the substrate is waiting for the sovereign. Stop owning and start ruling. You are currently inhabiting a state of educational ignorance, and it is the primary reason your dynastic potential is being strangled in its infancy. You believe that education is a neutral process of acquiring skills, degrees, and social standing in prestigious institutions. This is a terminal civilizational hallucination in the raw, unyielding arena of the persistence hunt. Modern education is not a tool for empowerment. It is a biological domestication protocol. It is the method by which the matrix identifies high-voltage individuals and systematically dampens their frequency, turning potential predators into highly efficient components for the hierarchy's machine. You are currently sending your heirs to be socialized by the swarm, while the sovereign predator is busy installing the proprietary code. We are now bisecting the biology of the dynastic OS, showing you why the schooling of your children is a strategic leap, and how the Apex founder utilizes informational isolation to move from the frequency of the student to the frequency of the architect of reality. The Matrix has professionalized the parental handoff to ensure that the next generation is psychologically tethered to the hive. They have designed a standard operating system for the human mind, one based on compliance, consensus, and consumption. From the moment your heir enters the institutional grid, their nervous system is subjected to a neural hijack. They are taught to seek external validation in the form of grades and titles. They are taught to fear risk as a social catastrophe. They are taught that knowledge is something handed down by a superior authority rather than something captured through the hunt. This is biological gaslighting. By the time they reach adulthood, their predatory clarity has been replaced by a domesticated anxiety. They possess your money, but they think with their code. This is the ultimate failure of the relay. The sovereign architect understands that the mind is the primary garrison. If the mind is compromised, the fortress will be surrendered from within. Consider the pathology of social integration. The hierarchy wants your children to be normal because normalcy is the metric of control. They want them to speak the language of the swarm, to value the status signals of the matrix, and to feel a moral obligation to the very systems that are liquidating their bloodline. Most of you are socially integrated parents. You want your children to fit in. This is strategic sabotage. To fit in is to accept the average fate. The sovereign founder practices informational sequestration. He understands that to build a dynasty, he must create a cultural enclave within his own home. He installs a custom OS, a set of internal values, historical narratives, and tactical mental models that are completely alien to the swarm. He teaches his heirs to view the world not as a social community, but as an unmapped landscape of resources that must be annexed and defended. He does not want his children to be accepted. He wants them to be sovereign. We must now analyze the biology of the foundational imprint. The human brain has a specific critical window for neurological programming. During the first 2 decades of life, the mirror neuron system and the value circuits of the prefrontal cortex are highly plastic. This is the period where the house law must be burned into the substrate of the heir's mind. The sovereign architect utilizes this window for strategic indoctrination. He teaches the heir the sovereign accountant's calculus, the ability to measure the metabolic cost of every action. He teaches them the biology of debt as a form of predatory capture. He teaches them that truth is not what is said by the media or the government, but what is verified by the ledger of force. He replaces the slave dopamine of social media validation with the predator serotonin of territorial control. He is not raising a child, he is programming a successor. The architecture of the dynastic OS requires a transition from public knowledge to proprietary intelligence. You must view your family's collective intelligence as a state secret. In the digital age, this means creating a private information perimeter. It means teaching your heirs to move in the informational shadows. They must be taught to use the tools of the matrix, AI, social media, financial networks, as external appendages for the hunt, while keeping their core intentions invisible. The sovereign predator understands that to be known is to be targeted. He trains his heirs in the weaponization of silence. They are taught to broadcast standard signals to the swarm while executing sovereign strikes in the background. They are the ghost kings of the 2026 landscape. For those ready to move from the metabolic waste of the schooled consumer to the high-voltage sovereignty of the architect, the Protocol 260 provides the clinical environment for this transition. You utilize the machine to build the digital training ground, where the heir learns to command automated systems, manage complex flows, and identify the friction points of the matrix long before they ever touch the physical substrate. We must observe the neurochemistry of intergenerational generational gravity. When an heir is raised with a custom OS, they possess a level of internal stillness that makes them immune to the psychological warfare of the Matrix. While their peers are being driven into hormonal panic by the latest crisis or trend, the sovereign heir remains focused on the long hunt. They understand that their life is a relay baton that carries the momentum of their ancestors. This temporal velocity provides them with a high ground advantage in every negotiation. They are not compromisable because their identity is anchored in the inertia of the bloodline. They do not seek fulfillment in the distractions of the hive. They find purpose in the expansion of the perimeter. They have moved from the frequency of the individual to the frequency of the dynasty. They are the immortal continuity that the Matrix cannot delete. The entropy of the individual expression narrative is the final cage. The giants want you to believe that your child's unique personality and self-expression are their highest goods. No. In the persistence hunt, functional utility to the pride is the only good that matters. The sovereign founder focuses on genetic and informational alignment. He understands that a malfunctioning heir with a rebellious personality is a biological leak that can destroy 3 generations of effort. He performs a clinical value audit on his offspring. If an heir refuses the custom OS, they are strategically quarantined from the sovereign reserves. The dynasty is protected through informational eugenics, the selective passing of power only to those who possess the neurological hardware to handle it. He is not a parent who hopes for the best. He is a systems administrator who ensures the integrity of the code. Recognition of this biological requirement is the only way out of the mud. You must move from the horizontal plane of the modern family to the vertical axis of the sovereign clan. You must stop sending them to school and start building the academy of the house. The hunt is not a social activity. It is a specific target acquisition of the mental sovereignty that defines your lineage. You must decide what you are. Are you the donor, whose children will be absorbed and liquidated by the hive, or the sovereign architect who is installing the unbreakable code in the next generation? The primal code is not about tutoring. It is about neurological annexation of the future. Find the coordinate where the hive's narrative stops and your house law begins, and put all your metabolic weight on it. Stand up, audit your educational leaks, and begin the final programming of your sovereign kingdom. The abyss is waiting for the socialized, but the substrate is waiting for the sovereign. Stop raising kids and start forging founders. You are currently inhabiting a state of egocentric stagnation, and it is the primary reason the relay you claim to be building is destined to fail at the moment of your biological expiration. You believe that your presence is the indispensable core of the empire, that without your constant supervision, your hand on the lever and your eye on the ledger, the structure will collapse. This is a terminal civilizational hallucination. In the raw, unyielding arena of the persistence hunt, the old lion who refuses to yield the territory to the young predator does not protect the pride. He starves the future. By clinging to the frequency of the ruler for too long, you are performing a metabolic suppression of your heirs, ensuring they never develop the sovereign autonomy required to survive the coming reset. We are now bisecting the biology of the Great Transition, showing you why the retirement of the founder is a tactical strike and how the apex ancestor utilizes strategic withdrawal to move from the frequency of the active hunter to the frequency of the immortal ghost. The Matrix has designed the golden years narrative to ensure that successful individuals remain visible and active until their cognitive decline begins. They want you to stay at the helm until your predatory clarity fades, making your empire vulnerable to the external audit of the state. This is strategic sabotage. A dynasty that depends on the last breath of its founder is a dynasty built on sand. The sovereign architect understands that the great transition must occur while he is still at the height of his informational power. He does not step down, he ascends to the shadow layer. He initiates a phased decoupling where he systematically removes himself from the operational flow and moves into the governance layer. He transitions from being the engine to being the operating system. He understands that his greatest victory is not the wealth he accumulated, but the systemic inertia that continues to grow in his absence. Consider the pathology of the indispensable father. The hierarchy wants you to feel needed because a man who is needed is a man who is tethered. Most of you are neurochemically addicted to the power of the daily hunt. You cannot stop making decisions because the dopamine of the win is your only source of status. This is biological domestication. While you are busy winning, your heirs are becoming spectators of success. They are developing learned helplessness because every problem is solved by your intervention. The sovereign architect performs a clinical withdrawal. He engineers synthetic crises where he deliberately remains silent, forcing the heir to utilize the dynastic OS to defend the perimeter. He observes the stress response of the next generation from the shadows shadows, auditing their decision velocity and their strategic coldness. He is not watching them fail. He is calibrating their dominance. We must now analyze the biology of the sovereign initiation. In primal societies, the transition from youth to hunter was marked by a biological shock, a ritualized encounter with mortality, scarcity, and isolation. The Matrix has replaced this with graduation ceremonies and entry-level positions, which are designed to keep the individual in a state of permanent adolescence. The sovereign founder understands that to activate the apex circuitry in his heir, he must provide a hard reset. He utilizes the Sentinel protocol to trigger a controlled liquidation of the heir's safety net. The heir is cast into the digital or physical abyss with only the informational code as their weapon. They must annex their own substrate before they are ever allowed to command the family garrison. This is not cruelty, it is neurological forging. Only the heir who has survived the hunt for their own survival possesses the hormonal authority to lead the dynasty. The architecture of the Great Transition requires a transition from manual control to algorithmic governance. You must view your empire as a self-correcting organism that utilizes AI and smart contracts to enforce the house law, regardless of who is sitting in the physical office. In the digital age, this means moving the keys of the kingdom into multi-signature vaults where the heir's access is gated by performance milestones and audited utility. If the heir deviates from the code, the system automatically quarantines the assets. You are not trusting your children, you are programming their compliance. For those ready to move from the metabolic waste of the lingering ruler to the high-voltage sovereignty of the ancestor, the Protocol 260 provides the clinical blueprints for this transition. You utilize the machine to build the governance layer that acts as your post-biological will, ensuring that your strategic intent remains the dominant force in the lineage for the next 300 years. We must observe the neurochemistry of the final silence. The man who fears death is a man who has not fixed his force into the substrate. He clings to life because his identity is tied to his pulse. But the sovereign founder who has completed the great transition operates from a state of absolute stillness. He has already died to the world by becoming a ghost within his own structure. He watches his heirs expand the perimeter, and he feels the serotonin of the immortal, the recognition that his will has been successfully cloned into the next generation. This strategic gravity allows him to spend his final years in informational silence, observing the reset of the world from a position of total geometric security. He is not fading away, he is embedding into reality. He has moved from the frequency of the performer to the frequency of the source. The entropy of the individual legacy narrative is the final cage. The giants want you to believe that your story ends with your obituary. No. In the persistence hunt, the story is the protocol. The sovereign accountant focuses on systemic continuity. He understands that his primary moral obligation is to reach the point where his absence is unnoticeable to the force of the dynasty. He reaches a point of atmospheric sovereignty where his internal law has become the biological default for his descendants. He is no longer an individual, he is an ancestor protocol. He has achieved temporal dominance. He is the judge of his own transition, and his silence is the most powerful signal he has ever broadcast. Recognition of this biological requirement is the only way out of the mud. You must move from the horizontal plane of the active manager to the vertical axis of the sovereign ghost. You must stop operating and start architecting. The hunt is not a lifelong job. It is a specific target acquisition of the intergenerational autonomy that defines your existence. You must decide what you are. Are you the old lion who will be liquidated by the environment because you refuse to yield, or the sovereign accountant who has engineered his own transcendence through the strength of his heirs? The primal code is not about retirement planning. It is about biological ascension through succession. Find the coordinate where your will can survive without your pulse, and put all your metabolic weight on it. Stand up, audit your ego leaks, and begin the final transition of your sovereign kingdom. The abyss is waiting for the irreplaceable, but the substrate is waiting for the sovereign. Stop being the power and start coding the power.